Have you ever stopped to think about those moments in history, those really surprising ones, where conflicts just seem to pause and rivals suddenly find, well, not just common ground, but maybe even a shared goal?
Yeah, those moments that kind of defy expectations.
Exactly. Today, we're doing a deep dive into one of those.
Yeah.
Picture this: July 1975. You've got the U.S. and the Soviet Union deep in the Cold War, icy relations, high stakes,
Peak tension.
and they reach out, not on Earth, but way up there in space.
Yeah.
It's a shortcut, really, to understanding space history, sure, but also global politics and just plain human ingenuity.
And that's the key thing, right? This wasn't just about clever engineering, though it was definitely that too. It was this huge symbol, détente, that whole relaxing of tensions.
Right, détente.
This mission showed everyone, look, even with these massive political divides, we can bridge them if the ambition, especially scientific ambition, is there. It was actually the first international crewed space mission ever. Set a huge precedent.
So that's our mission for you today. We're going to unpack the Apollo-Soyuz Test Project. We'll look at the crazy context it happened in, the technical problems they had to solve, really fascinating stuff, the personalities involved, and how it all still echoes today in space exploration. It boils down to how a simple handshake became this beacon of hope.
A handshake in orbit. Pretty amazing.
Okay, so to really get why Apollo-Soyuz was such a big deal, we need to step back into the mid-20th century.
Yeah.
The Cold War. I mean, for anyone who remembers that time or has studied it, the space race wasn't just some side project.
No, not at all. It was center stage.
It was the ultimate public arena, wasn't it? The U.S. versus the Soviet Union. And it wasn't just curiosity driving it. It was all tied up with the arms race, ICBMs, trying to prove your system was better, stronger, global superiority, basically.
Every launch, every orbit was like scoring a point in this massive ideological game.
Yeah, reported everywhere, celebrated like a national victory.
And the Soviets, well, they landed some early punches that really shook things up. October 4th, 1957, Sputnik 1, just this little metal ball going beep, beep, beep.
But it terrified people in the U.S., right?
Oh, absolutely. Sent shockwaves. Then you had Yuri Gagarin in 61, the first human ever in space. Monumental. And Valentina Tereshkova, the first woman, in 63, huge propaganda wins for the Soviets.
And so the U.S. finally gets the big one.
Right, the moon landing. July 20, 1969, Neil Armstrong's one small step. That was the American counterpunch, the ultimate achievement in that phase of the race. But think about the cost, the resources poured in by both sides. It was immense. Pushing boundaries, yes, but always with that edge of rivalry.
Immense cost, yeah. It does sound completely exhausting, just relentless. And you wonder, after the moon landing, could that pace just keep going forever, burning cash, keeping everyone anxious?
Well, that's where things started to shift. Maybe surprisingly, early 70s, the ice seemed to thaw just a little. Détente, this deliberate easing of tensions.
Nixon and Brezhnev starting to talk more.
Exactly. Leaders like Nixon and Lenin Brezhnev on the Soviet side, they started opening doors. Cautiously, mind you. But it led directly to this breakthrough agreement in 1972, signed in Moscow, specifically about space.
Which wasn't the first time cooperation had been floated, was it?
No, good point. Kennedy actually suggested something similar way back in 61, right after Gagarin flew. But the Soviets, well, they basically said no. They thought it was maybe a trick, espionage or trying to steal their thunder.
Ah, okay.
But by 72, things were different. Détente was happening. Both sides had proven they could get to space, get to the moon even. The climate was just better. So Nixon and Alexei Korsyagin, the Soviet premier then, they signed this agreement for space collaboration. And crucially, it included working on a joint docking system.
Which sounds technical, but it was hugely symbolic.
Hugely. It was like those neighbors who've been arguing for years finally agreeing to, share the lawnmower.
Yeah.
A big step. It showed they were willing to actually connect. And interestingly, even the names showed this slight duality, right? The Americans called it the Apollo-Soyuz Test Project.
ASTP, yeah.
And the Soviets called it Experimental Flight Soyuz Apollo. Soyuz first. Subtle, but it showed both sides acknowledging their part while aiming for unity.
Okay, so the politics are aligning, the symbolism is there, but the actual engineering. How do you physically connect two completely different spaceships designed by rivals in orbit? That must have been, well, a nightmare.
Oh, it was a massive headache. You're talking about Apollo built with one whole philosophy and Soyuz built with another. Their docking systems were just Incompatible. Apollo used this thing called probe and drogue, like a stick going into a cone.
Right.
Soyuz had a totally different mechanism, sort of a collar system. It's like trying to plug an old phone charger into a new laptop. They just don't fit. On a multi-million-dollar life or death scale.
So what was the fix?
Yeah.
You can't just file one down a bit.
No, definitely not. The solution was really ingenious. They built a whole new piece of hardware, the docking module. Think of it as this custom-built space adapter, about 10 feet long, 5 feet across.
Okay.
It had 3 hatches, one end docked with Apollo, the other with Soyuz, and a third one just in case, for emergencies. But the really clever part wasn't just the physical link, it was the air.
The air. How so?
Well, Apollo used pure oxygen inside, but at a really low pressure, only about 5 psi. Very efficient, but tricky. Soyuz used a mix, nitrogen and oxygen, much closer to Earth air, at normal sea level pressure, 14.7 psi.
So you couldn't just open the hatches between them. Someone would have a bad time.
Exactly. Decompression, sickness, of all sorts of problems. So the docking module, this adapter, it acted like an airlock too. It could match the Soyuz pressure. So crews could move between the ships safely without needing long, complicated pre-breathing or decompression stops. It basically ensured everyone could, breathe the same air at this cosmic meeting.
That is seriously clever. Solved a huge biological problem as well as a mechanical one.
Okay, but what about just
Yeah.
talk? I mean, the language barrier had to be another massive hurdle.
Oh, absolutely immense. But this is another area where the dedication was just incredible. Both crews, the Americans and the Soviets, they spent ages learning each other's languages.
Really? Like classroom stuff.
Yep. Americans learning Russian, Soviets learning English. And not just technical terms for buttons and switches, but enough to actually communicate, build some rapport. Translators were still vital, especially during the really complex training simulations.
I bet.
But you can just imagine, can't you, the training sessions, probably full of funny mispronunciations and awkward moments, trying to understand each other. It likely helped break the ice, actually, amidst all the serious technical work. Showed real commitment.
It really does. And the crews themselves, they must have picked some top people for this. Who were they?
Absolutely top tier. On the American side, you had Thomas Stafford as commander. Real veteran Gemini, Apollo flights already under his belt. Known for being calm, skilled.
Okay.
Then Vance Brand, the command module pilot. This was actually his first time in space, believe it or not. Very precise, meticulous engineer. And the third American was Donald D. Slayton.
Slayton. One of the original Mercury 7 astronauts, right?
The very same. He'd been grounded for years because of a heart condition and irregular heartbeat. Fought for years to get back on flight status. So him finally flying as the docking module pilot was this incredibly poignant story of perseverance. Just amazing for him.
Wow. And the Soviets.
Equally impressive. Alexei Leonov was their commander. Already world famous, he did the very first spacewalk back in '65. Very charismatic, outgoing guy.
Right, I remember hearing about him.
And his crewmate was Valery Gubasov, the flight engineer. Also his first space flight, a brilliant engineer, really key on the technical side. So you had this mix of veterans and rookies, engineers and pilots all coming together.
What really gets me, though, is that the connection started way before launch day. These weren't just professional meetings, were they? They actually spent personal time together. They did. And this was crucial. Extensive exchanges. They visited each other's countries, went to each other's homes, met families. Can you imagine? These Cold War rivals essentially having dinner together.
It's hard to picture given the backdrop.
Totally. They spent hours learning about the other side's spacecraft, too, really understanding how the other guys did things. And yeah, there were some really symbolic gift exchanges that cemented this growing relationship.
Like what?
Well, Stafford gave Leonov a model of an American flag that had actually been to the moon. A bit of a flex, maybe?
Yeah, subtle.
But also a nod to shared exploration. And Leonov gave Stafford a bracelet made from titanium that came from the actual Soyuz spacecraft metal. Very personal, very symbolic. These weren't just trinkets. They showed real respect and were building genuine trust. There are stories about Leonov and Stafford, both being amateur artists, actually sharing sketches. Little human moments like that were just as important as checking the docking seals.
Building bridges. Literally and figuratively. Okay, so all the prep is done, the trust is building, then comes the big day. July 15th, 1975, what was that like? 2 launches, different continents, heading for the same spot in space.
The tension must have been incredible, nervous excitement everywhere. The Soviets launched first. Soyuz 19 lifted off from Baikonur Cosmodrome way out in Kazakhstan at 8:20 a.m. Eastern Time. Soviet launches were always a bit more secretive.
Right.
But the news got out. Then, 7.5 hours later, 3:50 p.m. Eastern Time, the Apollo Saturn IB rocket roared off the pad at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Much more public, crowds cheering. Two launches, two nations, now aiming for each other. The world was definitely watching. Would this actually work?
And the docking, that had to be the nail-biting
And
moment.
absolutely, the climax. July 17th, 2 days after launch, they maneuvered towards each other 224 kilometers up, right over West Germany. Talk about symbolism.
Wow.
They lined up for the docking at 12:09 p.m. Eastern Time. And here's a detail people forget. The first attempt didn't work. Yeah, the capture latches didn't engage properly. Can you imagine the feeling? All that work, all that political capital, and maybe it fails. Like a first date where you trip on the doorstep.
Oh, man. Stressful.
Hugely stressful, but they didn't panic. The crews worked the problem, rechecked everything, lined up again, and the second try, thankfully, worked. Solid capture. You could practically hear the sigh of relief from mission control, I bet.
And then came the moment, the one everyone remembers.
The hatches swung open, Stafford, floating through from the docking module into Soyuz, reached out his hand, and he spoke in Russian, greeted Leonov,
And Leonov.
replied in English. Big smile. And they shook hands, right there, floating in space. That image, that handshake, just went everywhere. A simple gesture, but meaning so much after decades of confrontation. True détente, visible for everyone to see.
Incredible. Were there other symbolic things they did up there?
Oh yeah, it wasn't just the handshake. They exchanged special commemorative plaques. Stafford presented one talking about building a better world through understanding. Leonov gave one showing clasped hands over the earth. Very deliberate symbolism.
Case.
And then they spent 2 days together, not just floating around, but doing joint science experiments, sharing meals.
Ah, yes, the space food. I heard it was.
Yeah. American beef stroganoff from a pouch, Soviet borscht from a tube. Probably not five-star dining. But again, it was the act of sharing that mattered. Breaking bread or squeezing soup tubes together. They even did a joint press conference from orbit, fielding questions from journalists back on Earth.
They must have been something.
And you gotta love Deke Slayton's comment. Remember, the guy who waited over a decade to fly, he apparently said finally getting to space was like, finally riding the roller coaster after being told you're too short for years, pure joy. It just captures that human element perfectly.
That's fantastic.
Mm.
So looking back now, what did it all achieve? I mean, the immediate effect must have been huge.
Undeniable. Technically, politically, it was a massive success. It proved cooperation wasn't just a nice idea. It was possible, it worked, even between these superpowers locked in a Cold War. It showed leaders, yeah, there's another way besides just confrontation.
And it didn't just stop there, did it? It had ripples into the future.
Exactly. ASTT, as we call it, directly paved the way for what came next. Think about the Shuttle Mir program in the 90s, American shuttles docking with the Russian space station. That wouldn't have happened without Apollo-Soyuz proving the concept.
And the biggest collaboration of all.
The International Space Station, the ISS, it's basically the grandchild of Apollo-Soyuz. Up there right now, astronauts and cosmonauts from the US, Russia, Europe, Japan, Canada, they live and work together every single day, conducting research for everyone. It's this amazing floating symbol of unity, and its roots really trace back to that 1975 mission, to that handshake.
So the legacy is just profound. It's this constant reminder, isn't it, that science, that shared human goals, they can bridge almost any divide. Even when things on Earth are tense, you can find common ground way up there.
Yeah.
It really did change space policy, showing how collaboration could work. But it also sent a message for international relations generally. A powerful story.
It truly is.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's worth just holding on to that image. Apollo-Soyuz. A journey from fierce rivalry to this cautious partnership, and finally, that handshake echoing across the Cold War world. It really did inspire people then, and I think it still can today.
And it leaves us with a pretty important thought, doesn't it? You know, as we face all the challenges we have now globally, and as we think about where humanity goes next, out into the solar system perhaps, what can we really learn from that moment? From rivals finding a way to cooperate, how does that spirit, the spirit of that handshake, help us find common ground today to reach for the stars, together?
A powerful question to ponder. We definitely encourage you to keep exploring this incredible period in space history. There's so much there about ingenuity, politics, and ultimately the human desire to connect.